titled Future of Economic Transformation, Integrating Rural and Urban Economies. There's a little video that's been created for the session. May we please have the video? May I now invite Session Chair, Mr. Sanjeev Puri, President Designate CII, to kindly take forward the session proceedings, please.
So, distinguished guests on the dais, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It gives me immense privilege to welcome you to this session on future of economic transformation, integrating rural and urban economies. Rural India, accounts for roughly about two-thirds of the workforce. It accounts for two-thirds of the Indian population. It is very dependent on agriculture. The rural economy is a source of agri-produce for the entire nation, is an important source. The rural economy is also a source where young talent is available. It has the numbers available. It has the demographic advantage which is required for India's agriculture, manufacturing and services to grow. Urban is important for rural because that's where the market access lies. We do know that the per capita incomes in rural India are substantially below that in urban. Now, as India progresses to becoming a developed nation, it's important for the rural economy also to grow at much more accelerated rate. And that is where the crux of this session is around. How can the relation between rural and urban India be synergized to get greater impetus to rural India? How do we strengthen and enhance today's source of incomes in rural India, which a lot of it is agriculture dependent. And of course, agriculture also today has this challenge of climate change, which is adversely impacting productivity and quality. And the second facet is how do we prepare the youth in rural India to partake in the India's transformation over a period of time across all the three sectors. How do we skill them? How do we bring good quality education, good quality healthcare amongst others, and prepare them? And how do we perhaps create a hub and spoke kind of model so that the delivery of these services, the quality of these services is efficient and effective? And to debate and discuss and provide some insightful perspectives on this, we have a very eminent group of panelists today. So I have great pleasure today to, first of all, it's a privilege to have with us today Dr. Arvind Panagai to this session. Dr. Panagai's expertise, profound insights, and contribution to the field of economics, his illustrious career, including his tenure as Vice Chairman of Niti Aayog, his role as the Professor of Economics at Columbia University, and his numerous publications, research works exemplify his deep understanding of economic policies, development strategies, and the global economic trends. Thank you, Dr. Panagai, for being here with us today. I'm also delighted to extend a very warm welcome to His Excellency Dr. Manoj Nardeo Singh, General Secretary of ARDO, whose insights on rural-urban integration and holistic development are going to be most invaluable for this session. We also have amongst us Dr. Nandini Rangaswamy, Chairperson of CII Southern Region, and adds her seasoned perspective and leadership to our dialogue. Lastly, a special welcome to Ms. Surabhi Yadav, founder of Saje Sapne, who is empowering rural women in the modern workforce through her innovative Sapna centers. Now with this, let me now request our keynote speaker, Dr. Arvind Panagai, for his address.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon to all. Thanks to CII for this opportunity. Let me say that the real discussion of the subject of this session will come from the panelists. I'm not an expert on rural development. I see the transformation or economic transformation from a bit kind of 10,000 feet or so. So I'm just going to give you my sort of broad perspective of what India needs to do for the transformation of the economy from principally rural, agricultural, and traditional character to a modern industrial urban one. I think that is the way, as an economist, I see the problem of economic transformation. That is how most economies which have successfully transformed and transitioned from developing to developed have proceeded. As a starting point, let me say that a good bit of progress has been made. I think we sort of lost first 40 or 45 years after independence. Started well, finally in the 1990s. And in the last 2 decades particularly, starting from about 2003-04, we have truly grown. And a lot of what we see today has actually transpired in the last 2 decades. We have grown, and this is something that is not often realized, not understood, not appreciated. We have grown in the last 20 years at about 8% in real dollars. We often, the growth figures that we see is in real rupees, which is the conventional way to calculate the growth rate. We measure real GDP in real rupees, and then we work out the growth of the GDP from that. But if you look at the real dollar growth, given the fact that over this period, the rupee has appreciated in real terms against the dollar, the growth rate in real dollars has been, if I want to give you the precise figure, it's 7.9%. So it's been very phenomenal, and it's really on the back of that growth. In nominal dollars, of course, we have grown about 10.2% during this period. And mind you that during this period, we had to deal with the global financial crisis and then with COVID. So I've included both of those years, both of those shocks to the economy in that period, and yet the growth in nominal dollars ends up being about 10.2%. It is that growth which has put us in the fifth spot in the international GDP rankings in dollar terms. At this rate, if we continue to grow in the forthcoming years, we could actually become third largest as early as 26, 27, but more likely 27, 28 is when it is likely to happen. So overall growth prospects, actually both the growth that has been achieved in the last 2 decades and growth prospects that exist in the forthcoming decades are actually excellent for India. Also during this period, we have pretty much ended extreme poverty. This could be gleaned from the PLFS surveys, which had been coming annually since 1718. But now, in fact, we have had a more serious consumer expenditure survey 2022-23, and we still don't have the actual unit level data yet available for us, the researchers, to properly estimate the poverty. But whatever information that has been released in the form of about a 25-page document by the MOSPI, the extreme poverty, if it exists, is nothing more than about 3% or so of the population. So growth has been across the board because poverty does concentrate in the rural areas. And with the overall poverty levels having fallen to that low level, obviously poverty has been conquered largely, I should say, extreme poverty in rural areas as well. Now the bigger problem, as I see it, is one of transformation. And that stems from the following observation, that today we still have about 45% of India's workforce employed in agriculture. That sector, agriculture, produces about 15% of the GDP. So if you do very simple calculation that 15%, that 45% of the workforce producing 15% of the GDP means that the productivity, average labor productivity in agriculture is 1/3 of the average productivity in the economy. But if I really compare it to the average productivity in non-agricultural sector, industry and services, then it is 1/4 or 1/5. So what you have is a phenomenon that 45% of India's workforce still is employed in a sector which has a relatively very, very low productivity. And that is what I call the problem of underemployment. There's no reason for that large part of the population or the workforce to be employed in such a low productivity activity. And the problem of really, in my judgment, of rural development, meaning, how you bring in the rural incomes up significantly, is very much a problem of urbanization of India. So the two are very, very intimately linked. At the end of the day, a large part of this workforce, which is in agriculture, has to move into industrial or services economy. And that is the pathway ultimately to the transformation. And let me take a minute to explain why that process is so incredibly critical, that no matter what we do, we are not going to convert this elimination of extreme poverty into an act of prosperity, into a prosperous existence for the large part of the rural population without achieving this transformation movement of the workforce from out of agriculture into industry and services. Today, because such a large proportion of the population remains employed in agriculture, what it also means is that the land holdings in agriculture are incredibly small. About half of the land holdings in India today are less than half hectare, with an average size of less than a quarter hectare. These are, something you'd call a kitchen garden like land holdings. You can't really, for a family of 4 or 5, make a living on that. So most of the people actually who are doing agriculture, who are spending a large part of their time actually in agriculture, and which is how they get counted as agricultural workers in these surveys, are spending a good bit of, are earning a significant part of their income by doing non-agricultural activities. Now, you can also see that those non-agricultural activities are also not terribly high productivity activities, because if they were, they would actually invest a lot more time into those activities and not in agriculture. And so therefore you will not see in the data persistence of this very high employment in agriculture. So that's the first point. So without, if you are planning to even raise the agricultural productivity, the surest way to do it is to take a large part of this workforce out of agriculture, because land per worker currently is simply too little to give you a high average labor productivity in agriculture. So that's that side of the equation. Then you got to see how this process ultimately has to involve industry becoming, industrial or services employment becoming available such that these workers move to them. Now, another fact here to consider is the following. If I go by the latest census we have, which is 2011, so this is a little bit old figure, but that is the latest what we have. In India, about 76% of rural population, which is also 52% of the total population, lives in habitations that are less than 5,000. These are villages, and more than half of this particular population is in villages that are 2,000 workers or 2,000 people or fewer. These are very small habitations. Now, industry, so today, in terms of combating poverty, certainly we can bring the roads to them, we can bring electricity to them, we can bring water to them, we can bring toilets to them. But what after that? In the end, if prosperity as we all experience here, you and I, you are not going to be able to bring in the way you have brought electricity, water, toilets, etc. There has to be industrial employment or services employment. But in the habitations of 5,000 or fewer, and in fact many of these, as I said, more than half of that population in these habitations is in habitations which are 2,000 or fewer. Industry is not going to get there. Certainly nothing that is scalable industry that provides high productivity employment is going to go there. At the end of the day, for industry to be productive there at some reasonable scale, you need larger agglomerations, you need larger habitations, and that simply means that you got to either urbanize what is rural today, or you need to have part of this agricultural rural workforce migrate out of those habitations into the urban areas. So these are two possible models. These are, I call what I refer to the Shenzhen model and Shanghai models. Shenzhen used to be a bunch of fishing villages in the around 1980, and today it has grown into one of the most urbanized spots on the face of Earth. So that's one way to urbanize, that what is rural becomes urban. Or you have people migrating to the urban areas, as the expansion of Shanghai, which was not what it is, nothing like what it is today. If you look back in the 1980s, when China really started its very rapid growth. So one or the other way, you got to urbanize, move workers out of agriculture into industrial or services employment, and that ultimately is going to, you basically have to create facility, create a pathway for the movement of this workforce into larger enterprises. I mean, again, as I said, you can move them into rural industry and services, but given the kind of scale that is going to be there in these units, productivity will remain low. It is currently low, otherwise we would have seen actually much greater movement out of agriculture into these activities, but that hasn't happened. These are also subsistence level of activities because the scale is missing, and when I say scale is missing, that also means capital is missing from those enterprises. These are largely, they become hand industries, what you used to call in the 1950s, these kinds of industries, the hand industries, where meaning you work only with your hands and hardly any capital. So that is really the challenge, and this is where I think there is also a hidden challenge, which is to create enterprises which are employment intensive. Now, India's, and I'll take 2 minutes to explain that, and then I'll end my presentation. But India's traditionally, a problem has been that the kinds of industries that have grown, and there is a lot of historical reason behind this, which I discuss in my forthcoming book, which is the Nehru Development Model, History and Its Lasting Impact. So what has happened is that the industry in India has been highly capital intensive or skilled labor intensive. Successful industries are machinery industries, you've got pharmaceutical industries, you've got petroleum refining, you've got IT industry. These are all sectors which are either capital intensive or skilled labor intensive, which means that, for a large amount of capital, you are employing very few workers. As an example, in auto industry, labor costs or wage costs are just 4% of the total costs. And that's not atypical for the Indian industry. That is actually very typical of the Indian industry. Missing industries are the most labor-intensive industries, which is, of course, clothing, apparel, that is to say, furniture, footwear, a lot of the industries where for smaller amount of capital you can really employ a lot of workers. And that, I think, is the challenge that somehow paved the way for the emergence of larger firms. If you look at the apparel firms in China, 100,000 workers under one roof. I mean, that's the kind of scale that they have. Even our largest firms in apparel industry, we really have one very large firm in apparel industry, frankly, and the scale of that is significantly smaller than even apparel firms that exist in Bangladesh or some of the other non-China countries. So we need that, and I think that, of course, means bringing the reforms to labor laws, very, very important, but also perhaps the capital markets have to begin to release capital to some of these more labor-intensive industries. The focus still, I think, generally in our intellectual thinking, and that, as I said, goes all the way back to the Nehru era, that, we started off at that time with steel mills, machinery industries, and that kind of industrialization got hardwired at all levels. If you look at the political class, the bureaucratic class, the businessmen also, that is the kind of industries our entrepreneurs go into. But in the end, without, at least some of the capital beginning to move into these more labor-intensive activities, you would continue to have very heavy employment concentrated in agriculture, and that simply will impede the transformation that is actually required. As a last example, I'll give you the South Korea, which really transformed very, very rapidly in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. Agriculture, in 1960 accounted for about 70% of the employment in South Korea. By 1990, it had dropped up to about 18%. So massive kind of, reallocation of labor from relatively low productivity employment into high productivity employment. And that, of course, also raised the productivity in agriculture quite dramatically, because then land available per worker, per farm worker actually became much larger. So that, I think, is ultimately our challenge. And I expect that this is a challenge we are going to try to meet in the coming couple of decades, where I think otherwise the growth prospects are absolutely excellent for India. So thank you. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Dr. Panagai, for that very comprehensive overview of the manner in which rural transformation can be orchestrated. I now have pleasure in inviting Dr. Manoj Narsingh for his comments.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chair. Thank you for inviting the African Asian Rural Development Organization to be part of this panel. And congratulations to the CII for organizing such an important summit. And I'm also very happy that the keynote address has given the tone. I will like to bring the perspective from Asia and Africa, although the thematic we are discussing today is more rural India, integration of the rural economy and expansion and the rural transformation. I'm representing, and I would like to voice opinion from 32 governments. I'm representing 32 governments from Asia and Africa. I would like to give you a bit from that perspective, what is rural transformation happening. I'm also happy that the keynote addresser has been giving the last example from South Korea transformation. South Korea also is one of our members, and I'm actually coming back from South Korea, where I have had lots of discussion with their ministers. And the way they have been transforming is being a model which is being copied from South Korea to other member countries, obviously, but observing different specificities. In short, I would say my organization, African Asian Rural Development Organization, in short called ARDO, it's a manifestation of solidarity between Asia and Africa, especially for agricultural and rural development. We are working on the model of South-South cooperation and triangular cooperation. And we are very much based in terms of focus on capacity building to enable enough capacity to ensure rural transformation happening in these countries. As I said, 32 countries in Asia and Africa, and most of them, we've got highly developed countries also as members, but most of them are not that highly developed. And it's not a secret that Asia and Africa, especially Southeast Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, now we talk about India also, we've just got the figures that we live in villages. Most of the population, the majority of the population live in villages. If we go to the statistics, we know that in the world, the rural population is decreasing. But still in India and many of our member countries, we've got figures and statistics saying that over 50% of the population live in rural areas. I've got member countries where up to 70% of the population is in rural area. So we cannot talk about economic development if we do not talk about rural transformation, empowerment of people, empowerment of women, and empowerment of youth in these rural areas. Especially, we've been just going through COVID. We know how most of our economies were dismantled. We had so many issues. Now, food security is also very high on the agenda. I'm fully agreeing with the keynote addresser, saying that there are different models, but now I think even these models I will submit to this House can be reviewed with new technologies. We just had a session on AI. We had a session, so many sessions talking about technologies. My take is that we have to take more technology, bring more science to find solutions. Miseries are there, drudgeries are there. It's that we need to increase that productivity, agricultural productivity, ensure proper infrastructure, ensure connection and connectivity of rural dwellers to urban facilities and also to market facilities. It's in a gist, I'm telling you, a series of challenges. We've documented all these challenges because we are in operation since 1962, based in India, and we've got 6 regional offices, 3 in Asia and 3 in Africa. Lately, we are promoting more capacity building, long-term capacity building. We are also connected with IITs, where we are training people to focus more on rural development and also on transfer of technology. Technology has to be transferred to high level, high speed, high scale, review the scope. This is where maybe the people from industry will be called upon to take up these challenges. There are many ways to connect. There are many issues to be sorted out. But I personally believe, I'm coming from Mauritius. I know very much the African continent, but the whole African continent is looking towards India, especially after the G20 summit, as the leader of the global South. Not only the African continent, we've got the Middle East. Many of the Middle East countries also are members with us. So we know that they've got a series of quagmires, a series of problems which they cannot tackle on their own. This is where we will invite industry leaders. Government of India is already playing an important role in our organization. We will invite more stakeholders to come together to see to it that we can sort out part of these problems. And as an international, intergovernmental organization, we connect also to UN. I would like to highlight here that the UN SDGs, we've been having an evaluation last year where, or this midterm evaluation, where statistics and the evaluations are not rosy at all. Only 15% of the SDGs are supposedly online. More than 40-45% are off track, and there are certain completely derailed. So how do we bring all this back? It's only through collaboration. Make sure that there are appropriate government policies, programs, schemes. India has got a series of programs and schemes. We've got many other member countries. I can state it later on, maybe, if ever there will be questions on that. But I will just say that we've got all these programs, and we are still not able to achieve those SDGs. We should not forget most of our member countries in Asia and Africa. India has been quite successful. We've got a neighboring country, Bangladesh, also has been quite successful in SDGs. But most of these countries which are members with us, we've missed out even the MDGs. MDGs, we call them unfinished agendas. Now, SDGs, I've just given you the score for midterm. We are left only a few years to count to the end of the SDGs. That we will not be sure to reach them if we don't bring the private sector together with technology, innovation to increase those productivity. And maybe another golden opportunity in front of the private sector or the industry people from India is to tap upon the, I would say, the free trade area created in Africa, where 54 countries have united open trade and free trade between countries. This is where there are enormous possibilities, the possibilities of producing there, of transferring some of the technology to these places where you can ensure that trade will be within Africa itself there without any boundaries in terms of the physical boundaries and even of taxes between these countries. I will also maybe add that we have been able to facilitate this type of technology transfer. If you may be aware, under the IIT's group, there is a group called RUTAG, which is facilitating transfer of technologies from one country to another. But our organization, African Asian Rural Development Organization, we've developed what we call an Audiopedia, within which there is an ATM, affordable technology menu, where I will invite any concerned industrialists and people to come forward to expose that technology there, which might be useful and which might be generating rural transformation, not only in India. I'm trying to bring the debate more now on Africa and Asia on a regional basis. I will not, because we are in the political season, I will be refraining from making political statements, but we make sure that together, I think we can achieve those SDGs, make the rural transformation, facilitate the life of people in all these rural areas. These are millions and billions of people. When I'm talking about this united free trade area in Africa, it's another India in terms of population. It's 1.4 billion people in Africa. So these are the potential of doubling the market from the African perspective itself. And we should be ready also to, usually there is already a statement going on that when we had approved the 2015 SDGs goal, the caption was leaving no one behind. But we are afraid that now many countries are leaving the SDGs behind. So we should make more effort so that we don't leave those SDGs behind. This is a must for transformation, and there are many models. I would elaborate maybe later on, otherwise there are many strategies we have been adopting at some point in time. At various decades, there were different strategies, but nowadays the strategy is more focused on productivity enhancement through technology dissemination, technology sharing, and partnership from country to another country to make sure that we grow together as a region and as the world. And we are also ready to put in more in the agenda, which are going to be discussed. I think by next year, we are starting to discuss on the world level the agenda for after the SDGs. So the debates and the agenda formulation is being there. So this is a golden opportunity for this forum also to contribute to that. Thank you. And then maybe later on we take more questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments on a very wide-ranging subjects. I now invite Dr. Nandini Rangaswamy, besides being chairperson of Southern Region, she is also the founder and trustee of GRG Institutions and managing director, Chandra Group of Companies, India. So I'd request our next two esteemed panelists to maybe restrict the initial comments to a few minutes so we have some time for Q&A.
2 minutes is my speech time.
Okay.
Good afternoon, everybody. And it is indeed a privilege for me to be part of such a distinguished panel. So with 65% of our population still residing in rural areas, as the speakers before me gave you a lot of statistics, enabling such communities to lead fulfilling lives is extremely crucial. And this involves ensuring robust health, sufficient nourishment, adequate clothing, decent shelter, and access to modern conveniences, facilitated by science and, more importantly, technology. thus enhancing their overall well-being and quality of life. Rural transformation should aim to uplift these communities by improving economic opportunities, healthcare access, which is very important, clean water, transportation, infrastructure, sanitation, and very importantly, education. The Indian rural education system faces several challenges, which include inadequate infrastructure, limited access to technology, low retention rates, and high dropout rates among students and especially girls. So addressing these challenges require effective education policies, strategies, and community engagement. Education planning should involve revising the curricula of the education system, utilizing technology for educational delivery, providing vocational training, the adequate skills, also encouraging adult education initiatives, improving agricultural education, and integrating health education into the curriculum. Through the implementation of such strategies, education can act as a catalyst for comprehensive rural development, empowering individuals and communities to achieve sustainable progress. This kind of ecosystem will support for the youth to remain in their communities and look after their traditional legacies like farming with the use of modern technology, I truly believe. So the National Education Policy of 2020 that was introduced by the Government of India, it was integrated into the educational planning strategies, and it offers advantages for enhancing education in rural India. Its adaptable and diverse approach caters to the needs of various rural learners, cultivating skills relevant to both employment and entrepreneurship. The way forward to strengthen the rural education system in India includes supporting educators, parents, and the government in adopting new technologies and innovative practices for integrating technology into education, as I said earlier, promoting education startups to create affordable and efficient rural infrastructure, focusing on strengthening the labor market for equal participation in economic development, leveraging technology to enhance education effectiveness and bridge the rural-urban gap. I conclude by reiterating that education for rural transformation is crucial, and its success relies on a multifaceted approach. A well-functioning rural education system not only opens up livelihood opportunities for rural youth, but also plays a significant role in driving overall rural development and economic growth. Thank you.
Thank you, Nandini, for the very comprehensive coverage on education. I now have pleasure in inviting Ms. Surabhi Yadav, founder and CEO, Saja Sapna India. She's created these centers to empower rural women. So over to you for your comments.
Thank you. Am I audible? Yeah. Well, all the business leaders sitting in this room, I'm speaking to you in 3 capacities. One, as a person who grew up in Khargone, an aspirational district in Madhya Pradesh, with strong roots in rural Bundelkhand. 2, a person who studied at IIT Delhi and UC Berkeley, so kind of national innovation hub and international innovation hub. And 3, as a founder and CEO of CII Sapne, where young rural women are launching their STEM and management careers. They're becoming coders, they're becoming project managers, and so much more. And I'm technically speaking as the Didi in that organization. You know, the topic of this conversation is integrating rural and urban economies, how to make resilient economic futures. And my colleague Aparna asked me a very good question. How would that world look like? Before we start sharing the insights, can we create a mental visual of that world where this rural and urban economies are working hand in hand? And the best way that I can help you visualize is this conference. How would this conference look like in that world? It would look like that one conference would happen in Taj Palace and the other conference would happen under a banyan tree somewhere in Bihar, maybe in Katrasin in Bihar. It's a village in Bihar. It would happen where we'll see more diverse clothing and not just black and blue suits that, are filling this room right now. It would happen where we would have a session on rural-urban integration, but we would also have a session on the ruralization of businesses. Indian business, or Indian Inc., I would say, is sort of playing a catching up game. We are catching up with the kind of models that the West has set up, and then we are catching up with those trends. And I think we can be the trendsetters. And part of that reason is because we have such rich diversity. Like so many wealthy nations are now putting in a lot of investment in making their colleges, their workplaces, their industries more diverse. We take diversity for granted, and sometimes we undervalue it. So, how can we become the exporters of beautiful business models which are rooted in interconnectedness, which are rooted in diverse, complex, creative challenges? And for that, I think I have three things. And I'm right now, as I'm speaking, I'm thinking about all my students who come from Madhopura in MP, Uttarapatti in Bihar, in Uttar Pradesh, Katrasin or Magdampur in Bihar. When they become tech entrepreneurs, when they become professionals, competent, capable professionals, what is it that they need as they're sitting in their villages growing? First and foremost, we need sincere sense of partnership. We want to break this triangle or a cycle of oppressor, oppressed, and protector, where, urban industry becomes the protector. It takes the role of protector, while rural becomes oppressed. And somewhere we keep shifting the blame of who is the oppressor. We need to break this cycle and have a sincere sense of partnership, that there is so much that we need to learn from rural India and be better. You need a lot of paisa. So one is partnership, second is paisa. And I think everyone in this room understands paisa. We need funding for failure. And if a lot of corporate is sitting here, there is already a beautiful mandate we have, CSR mandate. And yet, we do not take big, bold bets to support experiments. If you want innovation for rural India or for India in general, you need a lot of experimentation. For experimentation, you need to allow failure. I mean, Silicon Valley, we talk about it in terms of as a parallel to innovation. Statistically, as per 2023, 90% of startups in Silicon Valley fail. And yet, the capital that comes into Silicon Valley doesn't drop. Where is that failure capital? Where is that innovation capital? Where is this genuine experimentation capital in our corporate India or in India in general? So we need funding for failure. In terms of products and processes, during COVID, a lot of edtech solutions emerged in India. Hardly any edtech solution actually worked for villages. तो हमारे देश में पैसों की कमी नहीं है, टैलेंट की कमी नहीं है, इनोवेशन की भी कमी नहीं है. If we want, we can create innovations that can reach masses. UPI is one of those innovations that have gone to many countries now. We do not trust the potential of the rural people. So, the best of our minds create the most suboptimal solutions for rural India. Matlab, 30 years ago, the solution came for rural women, Silai Kadai Bunai. 30 years later, the government and the NGOs and the companies are still stuck at Silai Kadai Bunai. So while we are talking about AI, we are not talking about कि 19 साल की लड़की जो गांव में बैठी है, what is her career trajectory? We are still talking for her livelihood. How can she get ad hoc income instead of a long-term growth pathway? So we need to trust the potential of rural people and create products that match that potential. And the last I would leave you with is principles, the design principles. Deep humility to learn from this big swath of our country where 70% of our population lives. Treating rural population not just as consumers of sachet marketing, but actually as producers. And they are actually giving them that status of producers because they are producing a lot that feeds urban India. And the last, we need a lot of patience capital. A lot of our girls go in formal workplaces for the first time. And usually it's the startups that take them in because startups are okay with having lean processes. I imagine what would it take for a big corporate to actually tweak the process, their hiring process, to open doors for a 19-year-old girl in Bihar who knows, all the coding languages in some sense. If you do not remember anything from what I've said, I hope you remember 2 questions. अगर आज़ादी की लड़ाई अभी चल रही होती, तो इंडियन कॉर्पोरेट कैसे उसमें हिस्सा लेती? Think about that, because right now we are in an independence struggle where a big part of our country doesn't get the dignity it deserves. And if not that question, again, I'm going to quote my colleague Aparna. She said, almost every person in this room, 3 or 4 generations back, their roots are in some village. I'm asking you, are you ready to come back home? Thank you.
So, thank you very much for that very insightful perspective right from the heart of rural. Thank you. And, as we heard all the eminent speakers, starting with the very insightful keynote address of Dr. Panagray and the other speakers, I think one point that came around is that whilst agriculture is one facet and that must have its own route to enhancing productivity, but equally, resources, people need to move on to other areas of industry and services. And Sorbi just spoke about recruiting a coding engineer from rural India. Absolutely a good point. But the question that comes to is that what about the access to resources for human capital development in rural India? Education, healthcare, or even spurring entrepreneurs from rural India. While the need and the need for that has been very clearly articulated, but what innovative business models could be deployed? Let me start here first with Dr. Manoj Nardio Singh. Based on your experience in 32 countries, what do you think are some learnings that could well work for the Indian context in really empowering people into rural India where the delivery or access to some of these resources for human capital development are not as well evolved as in urban centers?
Thank you very much. As I said in my intervention, we are very much in human resource development. Obviously, we've got many other projects also, but this is one of our flagship programs. And we are very much conscious that without that human resource, human capacity, we cannot transform any of these rural areas. The only thing I would say, because resources, as my co-panelists have been saying, might not be limited, but there are different ways to use those resources. The model which I prefer to state in any forum is one again from South Korea, where there is competition among villages to get resources, be it in infrastructural development, in human resource development. There was a system called Samuel Ondong, maybe some of you may be aware of that, where government put lots of facilities and there's many type of competition among villages to complete one of these facilities, then get access to other resources. And again, I will say from the international perspective, there are many possibilities of funding, there are many possibilities of access to resources, especially when we talk about rural areas, rural transformation. But the formulation should be very clear in terms of what will be the outcome, what will be the necessary amount of finance to be poured in, and the outcome and the impact should be measurable. We've got, again, some of the models which have been very successful, but we need to scale them to get access to more of the people in these rural areas. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I turn to you, Nandini, for the same question?
speak on education.
Yeah, really how to get, what kind of delivery models can,
Thank you. So equitable access to quality education for both the urban and rural youth is extremely important. So as I said earlier, I've spoken about the curriculum, I've spoken about teachers being exposed to industry and teaching relevant, the curriculum that is relevant to industry. Career guidance needs to be given at school levels in Tier 2, Tier 3 towns, schools existing in Tier 2, Tier 3 towns. And having said all this, nearly 65% of the school and higher education institutions offered to the students are in the hands of the private sector. In developed countries, the government's participation in education is very intense. And in our system, this private sector depend only on the fees paid by the government, by the students to run their institutions. So in many cases, it becomes very expensive for students, especially in the rural areas, to be able to afford quality education. So this needs a real course correction if we need to bring them all on par, the rural residing children, student population, if they're going to be coming up to par with the urban population. And Tier 2, Tier 3 towns are really suffering due to lack of funds and exposure to good quality teachers and technology and industry trends. I propose that industry has to have a greater participation in education as it is happening in the West and in the other developed countries. Even now, collaborative research and setting up of their laboratories by industries in institution is happening, but only in the premier institutes. Institutes in the Tier 2, Tier 3 towns are starved of all these new technologies and industry 4.0. So we need the support of industry for example, if an industry can adopt a school or a college in their vicinity and give all the support that's needed to that, especially in the Tier 2, Tier 3 towns. A good example is the Tatas have taken up 71 ITIs in Tamil Nadu alone and have upgraded and brought about state-of-art equipments into that the ITIs, and the faculty are trained to deliver a very good program to the students. So we are still at a quantity rather than at a quality level in our education system, and I hope it will change with the National Education Policy of 2020 and with more participation of industry in education. Thank you.
Thank you, Nandi. I'll now move on to you, Survi, for your...
Yeah, I mean, building human capacity is totally right up our alley. That's the work that we do. I would talk about 2 points. One is investment and second is innovation. In terms of investment, you'll have to play the long game. You're trying to create solutions where markets don't exist in the way markets are defined right now. So if you truly want to build the human capacity, tap on the potential of rural talent, you will have to play the long game. So if you're putting incubation centers or accelerators for startups in rural India or Tier 2, Tier 3 cities, you'll have to be open to hearing their pitches in their languages instead of English, right? You'll have to be open to hearing the challenges of their locality, of their cities, instead of having the benchmark that Delhi and Bangalore have set, or, in many cases, an outside country has set, right? And the second is innovation, especially innovation in education or innovation in skill development, because that's what is building the human capacity. Any solution that comes for rural India, I think this goes for any other users as well, but I will focus on rural India. If you want people to learn, there are 4 things your solution needs to have. 4 features that your innovation needs to have. 1, it needs to be rooted. It needs to be rooted in their lived experience. It needs to be rooted in their languages. Coding ko Hindi mein kya bolte hain? We don't know. If you don't know what to call coding in Hindi, in Marathi, Bhojpuri, then don't imagine a software engineer coming from, a remote village in Bihar or Uttar Pradesh. So it needs to be rooted in their reality. 2, it needs to be rejoicing. A learning heart is a beating heart. and beating hearts cannot be dull. So a scared heart cannot learn. So the environment in which learning happens, be it colleges, be it ITIs, be it non-profits, be it in conferences like this, it needs to be rejoicing. 3, it needs to be relational. It needs to focus on relationship building. It needs to focus on community building, because AI is the latest technology we have in terms of human capacity building. The old technology that exists is neuroscience. And how people learn hasn't changed in last 2000 years. So the neuroscience of it continues to say that if you were watching me online right now, you wouldn't be hearing even a word that I say. But right now you're sitting with me, so maybe some of it is going to you. And last, it needs to be rationale building. Paulo Freire said that, pedagogy of the oppressed, don't treat your students as empty bank accounts, as if they have nothing on their own and you are here to teach them. Treat them as people with strong, logical, rational capacity and build that rationale. So yeah, thinking investment as a long game and treating innovation with a lot of feminist line of thought. People are not problem, people are people. I think that potentially could help.
Okay. Let me also ask you a supplementary question, and then I will ask Mr. Narsingh also. Now, on how do you think the spirit of entrepreneurship could be made even more vibrant in the rural system?
Yeah. When you remove the scarcity mindset, right now most of India are entrepreneurs, but they're entrepreneurs not by choice, but out of desperation, because kuch aur option nahi hai, that's why we're becoming entrepreneurs. If you provide ecosystem services, incubation, accelerator, mentorship, access to markets, proper social status and celebration for entrepreneurship, moving away, let me not say moving away, spreading beyond cities. I think the moment ecosystem services come in play, ideas spark. Providing incentives for solving local problems could be a good start, I would say.
Would you like to share some perspectives from experience in all the...
Thank you. I think entrepreneurship is already well developed in many of these rural areas. We need to give the appropriate support, appropriate infrastructure. People with limited means, limited resources are trying to find their own livelihoods and are trying to find solutions to difficult problems. So the spirit of entrepreneurship is very, very much in most of these rural areas. And we are, as policymakers, as practitioners, as people from the business sector, we have to ensure that they are provided the conducive atmosphere, the conducive environment for them to make good use of that entrepreneurship spirit for the benefit of their villages and for the benefit of the economy at large, and obviously for the whole humanity in general. Thank you.
Thank you. So may I now request you, Dr. Banagrai, for some closing comments, closing thoughts on, you heard wide-ranging issues being spoken about by the panelists.
Well, I think a lot of the things we have talked about, we have also tried. But some of the things, I think, what Surabhi said, something to pay attention. One, this thing about teaching them in their language, trusting them. I think that sort of thing is very important. Provide the environment, let them figure out. I think they can do it. Now, at the same time, I still return to this theme that in the end, you also need to provide some sort of pathway for them to connect to the urban space. Because at the end of the day, where they are, it is a very small marketplace. If they are going to really scale up in any kind of entrepreneurial enterprise, there will have to be access to the urban market. So one or the other way, the link to the urban economy is extremely important. And don't see this as two separate economies. These actually ought to be integrated economies. Just as a lot of the urban enterprises are selling their products to the rural market, you have to have a pathway for the rural folks to actually access the urban ecosystem. I think that's really crucial. So roughly that's where I will leave it.
So I'd like to thank all our esteemed panelists. This has been a very enlightening discussion. And really my takeaways from this discussion are, one, of course, is that, whatever is happening in rural India today, as far it's predominantly agriculture, that has to get productive and needs the resources and the access to technology to actualize its potential. That's one side of the coin, and to be able to also become resilient. The other side is that within rural India, people outside of agriculture need the empowerment and the ecosystem to be able to actualize their potential. I think a point that was well made by Surbhi. And the third is that the rural folks also need to have access to the resources for education, healthcare, skilling, and so on and so forth, so that they are able to effectively participate in development in industry, in manufacturing and services, and the linkages get created. Maybe there is also an opportunity somewhere, as I'm thinking about it, to create a hub and spoke model where there is a cluster of villages and there is a hub that is a resource center for delivery of some of these services, and of course in the local context. So both the aspects about everyone being able to actualize their potential within the rural economy and our people being able to access the benefits or the opportunities that exist in the urban economies. And both have to grow synergistically. Rural India certainly needs to grow for India to really progress. So once again, thank you very much for the very enlightening discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have a little token of appreciation that we'd like to present to our esteemed speakers. May I request Mr. Puri to present the memento to Dr. Arvind Panagria. To Dr. Manoj Nardev Singh. Dr. Nandini Rangaswamy. To Ms. Surbhi Yadav, please. And we request Dr. Panagria to please hand over the memento to Mr. Sanjeev Puri. Thank you, everyone.